The whip cracked. Not leather on flesh, yet, but the auctioneer's signal. Dust choked the air, thick with the coppery tang of fierce sweat and old blood staining the fort's solitude trading post floor. Two women, heavy with child, stood chained on a rough plank stage. Used goods, the auctioneer spat, but sturdy. Their eyes, wide with terror, scanned the leering crowd. Near the back, shadowed by a crumbling adobe wall, a man watched. His face was a map of grief carved in stone, eyes like flint in the desert sun. One hand rested, almost casually, on the worn ivory grip of his Colt. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've got something extra special saved just for you. The man in the shadows was Silas Thorne. The name hadn't meant kindness in these parts for a long time. It meant the cold efficiency of a Winchester rifle, the finality of a hangman's not remembered too late. Today, it meant watching a particular kind of hell unfold under the brutal Wyoming sun beating down on Fort Solitude. The trading post was less a fort and more a collection of sagging buildings clinging to a muddy crossroads where law was a rumor and decency had died of thirst. Silas didn't flinch at the auctioneer's next crack of the whip, this time landing a stinging blow near the bare foot of the taller sister. She gasped, staggering, but the shorter one, her belly a taut, impossible curve beneath a threadbare shift, caught her elbow. A silent exchange passed between them. Fear, yes, but a fierce, protective spark that snagged Silas's attention, hooking something deep and raw inside his chest. He hadn't felt a hook like that since Sarah. Since the small, white-painted cross under the cottonwood tree back in a valley that no longer existed. "Martha!" the shorter sister hissed, her voice a raspy whisper barely audible over the crowd's low murmur. "Steady. I'm all right, Esther," Martha breathed, straightening, though her knuckles were white where she gripped the chain linking their wrists. Her gaze swept the crowd again, a trapped animal seeking an escape that wasn't there. It landed for a fleeting second on Silas. He saw the calculation there, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't like the others. Then it flickered away, extinguished by the harsh reality of their situation. The auctioneer, a man named Silas Braxton, a coincidence of names that felt like a cruel joke to Thorne, swaggered on the stage. He wore a garish waistcoat over a sweat-stained shirt, his face ruddy beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Gentlemen, fine stock here. Bit worn, granted, carrying extra baggage," he chuckled, gesturing crudely at their swollen bellies. A ripple of coarse laughter went through the crowd. "But prime childbearers still. Strong backs. They'll fetch a good price for the mines, or wherever else a man has need of sturdy female company." His leer was explicit. Sturdy. The word echoed in Silas's skull, bouncing off the hollow places left by grief. Sarah hadn't been sturdy when the fever took her and the tiny life she carried. She'd been fragile, beautiful, stolen. Seeing these women, Martha and Esther, treated like broodmares, their vulnerability a commodity, ignited a cold fury deep within him, colder and harder than the grief that usually sat there. It wasn't chivalry. It wasn't even righteousness, not really. It was the unbearable sight of innocence crushed under the same boot heel that had stamped out his own light. Braxton started the bidding low. $20. He'll start me at 20 for the pair. Think of the labor. Think of the future yield. A grizzled miner near the front spat tobacco juice and raised a gnarled hand. 20. Another man, his eyes rheumy and predatory, countered 25. The bids inched upwards, a grotesque dance fueled by greed and base appetites. $30. 35. Martha flinched with each increment, each number a sentence to a life of degradation. Esther kept her head down, her dark hair a curtain, but Silas saw the tremor in her shoulders. He hadn't moved. He'd been a statue of grief and dust since riding into this cesspool. But now a plan, desperate and unformed, crystallized. He couldn't ride away. Not this time. The image of Sarah's face, pale against the pillow, superimposed itself over Esther's bowed head. The tiny knitted booties Sarah had been making, they'd burned with the cabin. Silas Thorne stepped forward, out of the shadows. His boots, scarred leather-coated in the ever-present Wyoming dust, thudded softly on the packed earth floor. The murmur of the crowd died instantly. Heads turned. Recognition flickered in some eyes, followed by wariness. His reputation preceded him, a tangible thing like the smell of gunpowder that clung to his duster. He stopped 10 paces from the stage, his gaze fixed not on Braxton, but on the sisters. He saw Martha tense, saw Esther peek cautiously through her hair. He saw the terror deepen, mixed now with confusion. $50, Silas said. His voice was low, gravelly from disuse and trail dust, but it cut through the silence like a knife. A collective intake of breath. $50 was a fortune for most here, especially for used goods. Braxton's eyes narrowed, calculating. He hadn't expected Thorne to bid. Everyone knew Thorne hadn't spoken more than 3 words strung together since the tragedy. He wasn't known for buying anything but bullets and whiskey. Well, Braxton drawled, recovering his smarmy composure. Silas Thorne didn't take you for a family man. $50, you say, for the pair, or just the pretty one? He smirked, gesturing vaguely at Martha. Silas didn't rise to the bait. He kept his eyes on the sisters. The pair, he stated flatly. He pulled a worn leather poke from his coat pocket, the coins inside clinking with a heavy, undeniable sound. He held it up, a silent challenge. Braxton hesitated. He sensed a profit slipping away, but also the danger in crossing Thorne. He scanned the crowd. $50. Going once. Any advance on 50? Think of the work they'll do. Think of the children. Practically free hands in a few years. Silence. The miner who'd bid earlier spat again, shaking his head. The rheumy-eyed man muttered something dark, but kept his hand down. Thorne's presence, his icy stillness, was a damper on the proceedings. Going twice, Braxton dragged it out, hoping. Nothing. He scowled. Sold. To Mr. Thorne. For $50. He sounded almost disappointed. He snatched the poke from Silas's outstretched hand, his fingers brushing Silas's callous palm with distaste. Chain, keys extra. $1 more. Silas dropped a silver dollar onto the stage at Braxton's feet. It landed with a dull thud in the dust. Without a word, he stepped up onto the rough planks. The sisters shrank back, pressing against the rough-hewn post behind them. Martha's breath hitched. Esther squeezed her eyes shut. Silas knelt, ignoring the stares burning into his back. He smelled their fear, sharp and sour, mixed with the scent of unwashed bodies and hay. He saw the raw chafing on their wrists from the iron. He pulled a small, sharp skinning knife from his boot. The sisters recoiled, a whimper escaping Esther. He didn't speak. He simply reached for Martha's manacle. She flinched violently. Easy, he murmured, the single word rough but devoid of threat. He slid the knife point into the lock mechanism, wiggled it with practiced, surprisingly gentle precision. A click. The manacle sprang open. He repeated the process with Esther's, his movements efficient, impersonal. The heavy chains clattered to the wooden stage like dead snakes. He stood, towering over them. Can you walk? His voice was still low, but there was a different quality to it now. Not warmth, but a lack of the expected brutality. Martha looked at Esther. Esther gave the tiniest nod, though her legs trembled visibly. We can walk, Martha answered, her voice thin but clear. She placed a protective hand on her sister's arm. Silas nodded curtly. He turned, stepping off the stage, expecting them to follow. He didn't look back. He walked towards the open double doors of the trading post, the crowd parting silently before him like reeds before a stone. The sisters stumbled after him, barefoot on the hard-packed earth, moving through the gauntlet of leering, confused, and hostile faces. The smell of stale beer, unwashed bodies, and cheap tobacco hung thick in the air, replaced abruptly by the dry, clean scent of sagebrush and dust as they stepped into the harsh afternoon sunlight. Silas's horse, a rangy gray gelding with intelligent eyes, stood tethered to a hitching post alongside a swayback pack mule. He untied the gray, then turned to the sisters. They stood huddled together, squinting against the sun, looking impossibly vulnerable and out of place in the dusty yard. Martha scanned the horizon, her expression one of dazed disbelief. Esther kept her gaze fixed on the ground, one hand unconsciously cradling her swollen abdomen. "Where's your things?" Silas asked, his voice still gravelly but lacking its earlier edge. Martha shook her head, a bitter twist to her lips. "We have no things. Just these." She plucked at the thin fabric of her shift. Silas grunted. He pulled a worn saddle blanket from behind the gray saddle and another from the pack mule. He handed them to Martha. "Wrap up. Sun's fierce." He turned to the pack mule, untying a small sack. He pulled out 2 pairs of thick wool socks, worn but clean. "Put these on. Ground's rough." The simple acts of kindness, so unexpected, seemed to momentarily paralyze them. Martha took the blankets and socks with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered, the words thick with unshed tears. She helped Esther sit on a nearby crate, kneeling to pull the socks over her sister's bruised feet. Esther remained passive, her eyes distant, lost in some internal horror. Silas watched them, the cold knot in his chest tightening. He saw the shadows under Esther's eyes, the way Martha moved with a stiff protectiveness that spoke of recent violence. He saw their youth beneath the grime and terror. They weren't much older than Sarah had been. He busied himself checking the mule's pack, securing the few supplies he had: flour, beans, coffee, jerky, a meager amount for a solitary man, woefully inadequate for 3, soon to be 5. He felt the weight of their stares, heavy with unspoken questions and profound uncertainty. Why? What now? What did he want? He didn't have answers. He only knew he couldn't leave them to Braxton and the men who'd bought his other stock. He mounted the gray, the leather creaking loudly in a quiet yard. He looked down at them. "Can you ride?" "The mule's gentle." Martha helped Esther stand. "We can manage the mule," she said, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. "Together." Silas nodded. He guided the mule closer. Martha climbed awkwardly onto the patient animal's back, then reached down to help Esther up. It was a slow, painful process, Esther biting her lip to stifle a cry as she settled behind her sister. Martha took the lead rope. Silas nudged the gray forward, leading them away from Fort Solitude, heading west into the vast, empty expanse of sagebrush plains broken by distant, purple-hued mountains. The late afternoon sun cast long, distorted shadows. Dust puffed up from the horses' hooves, coating everything in a fine, gritty film. The silence stretched, broken only by the rhythmic plodding of hooves, the creak of saddle leather, and the sigh of the wind through the dry grass. It was a silence thick with the ghosts of the past and the terrifying uncertainty of the future. Martha finally spoke, her voice tentative, carried on the breeze towards Silas riding a few yards ahead. "Mr. Thorne." "Silas?" "What?" He didn't turn. He kept his eyes on the trail ahead, a faint track barely visible in the scrub. The question hung in the air, heavy as the humidity before a storm. Why indeed? Because they were pregnant? Because they were helpless? Because he saw Sarah in their fear? None of it felt sufficient. He searched for words, finding only the raw truth that had propelled him onto that stage. "Couldn't watch it," he said finally, the words scraping out. "Not again." He didn't elaborate. "Again." The word seemed to echo in the emptiness. Martha fell silent, absorbing it. Esther remained mute, a silent weight against her sister's back. They rode for another hour, the sun dipping lower, painting the sky in streaks of orange and crimson. The land grew more rugged, dipping into shallow arroyos and rising over low, rocky ridges. Silas kept a watchful eye, scanning the back trail, the horizons. Braxton hadn't struck him as a man to easily relinquish $50, especially not to someone like Silas Thorne. Pride and greed were powerful motivators. He was searching for a place to camp for the night, somewhere sheltered and defensible, when Esther suddenly stiffened behind Martha. A low, keening sound escaped her lips, barely audible. Martha twisted, trying to see her sister's face. "Esther, what is it?" Esther didn't answer. She was staring, wide-eyed with a fresh wave of terror, past Silas, towards the crest of the low ridge they had just descended. Her hand shot out, trembling violently, pointing. Silas followed her gaze. His blood turned to ice water in his veins. Silhouetted against the fiery sunset skyline, stark and menacing, were three riders. They weren't moving, just sitting their horses, watching them. Even at this distance, Silas recognized the bulky shape of the lead rider, Silas Braxton, and the long barrel of a rifle resting across his saddle horn caught the dying light like a sliver of cold, hard promise. They hadn't ridden away. They'd followed. They'd found them, and they were closing in. The riders on the ridge were motionless statues carved from the dying light. Silas Thorne's hand instinctively drifted towards the worn Winchester stock jutting from his saddle scabbard. His knuckles whitened. 50 yards back, Martha gasped, following Esther's trembling finger. The mule shuffled nervously. "Keep moving," Silas commanded, his voice low and rough, cutting through the panicked silence. He didn't take his eyes off the silhouettes. West, into that draw ahead. Now. He nudged the gray into a ground-eating trot, forcing the pace without breaking into a run that might panic the sisters or the overloaded mule. The clatter of hooves sounded unnaturally loud. He felt the weight of the watching eyes like a physical pressure between his shoulder blades. Braxton, pride and greed, a poisonous brew. Silas had known the man wouldn't let $50 and a public slight slide. But this felt like more than just reclaiming lost profit. The stillness of the watchers, the deliberate menace of the rifle catching the sun. It spoke of calculation, not hot-headed pursuit. The sisters urged the mule forward, Martha gripping the lead rope with fierce determination, Esther clinging to her waist, face buried in her sister's thin shift. They plunged into the shallow, brush-choked draw Silas had indicated. The earth walls rose steeply on either side, offering scant cover from above, but shielding them from immediate view from the ridge. Silas reined in sharply, scanning the ridgeline. The silhouettes were gone, vanished as if swallowed by the fiery sky. But the feeling of being hunted intensified, a cold serpent coiling in his gut. Did they leave? Martha whispered, her voice trembling. She scanned the empty skyline, hope warring with dread. "No," Silas stated flatly. He dismounted, his boots crunching on the dry gravel of the draw's floor. "They're circling, trying to get ahead, cut us off, or find better ground." He moved swiftly, pulling the Winchester free. The metallic snick of the lever being worked echoed sharply in the confined space. He chambered around. "We need shelter. My place isn't far. 2 hours, hard riding. But we won't make it in the open before dark." Esther whimpered a small, broken sound. Martha wrapped an arm tighter around her. "What do we do?" Silas scanned the draw. It ran roughly northwest, deeper into a patchwork of eroded hills and stunted pines. He remembered a place. Not ideal, but defensible. There's an old line shack, abandoned trapper's place, half buried in the hillside. Rocky approach. We hole up there tonight. Fortify. Move at first light. He didn't wait for agreement. Mounting up, he led them deeper into the narrowing draw, the gray picking its way carefully over loose rock. The sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the world into bruised purple twilight. The air grew instantly colder, carrying the sharp scent of pine resin and the damp, mineral smell of exposed earth. An owl hooted, a lonely sound that only amplified the silence pressing in around them. Silas pushed them hard, his senses straining for any sound beyond their own passage. The creak of leather, the labored breathing of the mule, the sisters' soft, frightened murmurs. After an hour of tense progress, the draw opened into a small, hidden basin. Nestled against a sheer rock face, partially obscured by a tangle of wild rose and scrub oak, was a squat log structure. It looked more like a natural outcrop than a building, its roof sagging, one window a gaping black hole. The door hung askew on leather hinges. It stank of decay, animal musk, and ancient wood smoke. "Here," Silas announced, dismounting again. "Get inside, quickly." He tossed the gray's reins over a low branch and moved to help Esther down from the mule. Her legs buckled slightly as her feet touched the ground. Martha caught her. "We'll make it," Martha murmured, more to herself than Esther, guiding her sister towards the dark maw of the doorway. Silas followed, Winchester held ready. The interior was a single room, thick with dust and shadows. The remnants of a crude stone fireplace dominated one wall. A broken table, a single three-legged stool, and a pile of rotted furs in one corner were the only furnishings. The air was frigid, smelling of mold and neglect. Moonlight filtered weakly through the broken window and gaps in the chinking. "Barricade the door once I'm back in," Silas instructed, handing Martha the saddle blankets and the small sack of supplies. "Use that table, anything heavy. Don't open it for anyone but me." He saw the terror flare in her eyes at the thought of being left alone. "I'm just securing the horses and checking the perimeter. 5 minutes." He vanished back into the twilight. Martha immediately dragged the broken table towards the door, her movements fueled by adrenaline. Esther sank onto the pile of furs, pulling her knees up to her swollen belly, rocking slightly. Her silence was a heavy, suffocating thing. Outside, Silas led the gray and mule into a narrow cleft in the rock face behind the shack, deeper shadow offering concealment. He hobbled them loosely, gave them a scant handful of grain from his meager supply, and filled their nostrils with the scent of water from his canteen. A cruel promise. He moved silently then, a shadow among shadows, circling the shack, scanning the basin's rim where it met the star-strewn sky. Nothing moved. No sound but the sigh of wind in the pines. Yet the feeling of unseen eyes persisted. He found tracks near the shack's entrance. Deer, mostly old coyote scat. But near the rocky approach they'd used, partially obscured by loose scree, was the unmistakable fresh gouge of a shod hoof. Not theirs. Recent. His jaw tightened. Back inside, he found the door braced with the table and the three-legged stool wedged under the latch. Martha stood guard near the window hole, a heavy piece of firewood clutched in her hands like a club. Esther hadn't moved. "Anything?" Martha asked, her voice taut. "Sign," Silas grunted. He moved to the fireplace, clearing the debris of old nests and ash with his boot. He found some dry twigs and brittle branches stacked neatly in a niche, left by the trapper, or perhaps another desperate soul who'd sheltered here. He built a small fire, the kind that gave more light than heat, less smoke. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the rough log walls, revealing years of grime and the desperate history etched into the place. The meager warmth was a psychological comfort more than anything. He handed Martha a strip of jerky and a hard biscuit. She took it, broke the biscuit in half, and offered part to Esther. Esther shook her head mutely, pressing her face into the furs. Martha sighed, a sound full of exhaustion and helpless love, and placed the biscuit beside her sister. Silas sat on the dirt floor near the fire, his back against the cold stone of the fireplace, the Winchester across his lap. He watched the meager flames. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken fears and shared exhaustion. The wind moaned softly outside, finding cracks in the logs. Martha finally spoke, her voice small in the vastness of their vulnerability. Braxton, he wasn't just selling workers. She stared into the fire, her knuckles white where she gripped the jerky. He kept saying Esther, she was special stock, that her baby, he had buyers lined up who paid extra for untainted lineage. She spat the words like poison, said it was pure, whatever that means, in his filthy mouth. That's why the bids were climbing. That's why he's so mad. We weren't just $50. Esther was his prize, so a cold fury, colder than the Wyoming night, washed over Silas. Special stock, pure lineage. It wasn't just slavery. It was something darker, more calculated. Breeding. Esther wasn't just a bearer of labor. She was a vessel for a child Braxton saw as valuable chattel. The implications curdled Silas's stomach. He saw Esther flinch as if struck, curling tighter into herself, a low moan escaping her lips. Martha reached out, laying a trembling hand on her sister's back. Silas stared into the flames, the image of Sarah's pale, lifeless face flashing before him. The tiny, unfinished booties, the crushing weight of futures extinguished. He'd bought these women to spare them degradation, but he'd unwittingly stolen Braxton's most valuable commodity. The man wouldn't rest. He'd burn the territory down to get Esther back, or at least what she carried. My wife, Silas said, the words grating out, unfamiliar on his tongue after so long. He didn't look at them, keeping his gaze fixed on the fire's weak dance. Sarah, she was with child. Fever took them both. 2 winters back. He paused, the silence heavy with the ghost of his grief. Buried them under a cottonwood. Alone. He didn't elaborate on the burning cabin, the fleeing, the hollow shell he'd become. The simple statement hung in the frigid air, a stark monument to loss. Couldn't watch it happen again, he added, echoing his earlier, inadequate explanation. Not to a child. Not like that. Martha's eyes, wide and luminous in the firelight, met his across the small space. He saw understanding flicker there, a shared language of devastating loss. Esther lifted her head slightly, just enough for Silas to see the glint of tears tracking through the dirt on her cheeks. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall of terror, a recognition of something other than predation in the grim-faced man with the rifle. The wind picked up, whistling through the broken window, making the fire gutter. Silas stiffened. A new sound threaded through the moan of the wind, faint, distant, but chillingly distinct. The high-pitched, excited yipping of coyotes. But it wasn't the usual chorus. It was concentrated, coming from a direction of the rocky approach. He was on his feet instantly, Winchester ready, motioning Martha back from the window. He moved silently to the gap, pressing himself against the cold, rough logs, peering out into the moon-washed basin. Nothing moved in the open. The basin lay silver and still under the vast, starry sky. The pines on the far slope were dark sentinels. But the coyote yips came again, closer now, sharp and insistent. Not a hunt, a signal. Then he saw it, near the base of the slope where the scree began, where he'd found the shod hoof print. A small, dark shape lay on the pale earth. It hadn't been there before. Silas squinted, his heart hammering against his ribs. It looked like a bundle of rags. But the coyotes wouldn't be yipping like that over rags. Stay here, he hissed at Martha. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it. Don't make a sound. He slipped out into the biting cold, melting into the deep shadows along the rock face. The yipping intensified, frantic now. He moved like a ghost, keeping low, the Winchester held tight. The bundle lay 20 yards from the shack's entrance. As he neared, the smell hit him, coppery, thick, unmistakable. Blood. It wasn't rags. It was the carcass of a young deer. Its throat had been slit with brutal efficiency, but it hadn't been butchered for meat. It had been dumped, dragged. A trail of dark, glistening blood smeared the rocks leading back towards the approach path. A deliberate trail. A message. The coyotes yipped again, closer still, drawn by the potent scent. Silas scanned the dark rim of the basin, the inky blackness beneath the pines. Nothing, but he felt it. Eyes, watching. Braxton wasn't just out there. He was playing with them, sending a message written in blood and fear. I can get close. I can leave my mark. You're not safe. Not even here. He turned back towards the shack, the carcass a grisly beacon in the moonlight. He needed to get rid of it, draw the coyotes away, but moving it risked exposing himself. As he took a step, his boot crunched on something half buried in the gravel near the deer's hindquarters. Not bone, something metallic. He bent, picking it up, wiping the cold grit away. It was a badge. Tarnished silver bent, the pin broken off. A 5-pointed star. A lawman's badge. But it was old, worn, the detail indistinct. It didn't belong to any sheriff Silas knew in this lawless territory. Why was it here? Dropped deliberately? Lost long ago. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air seeped into his bones. What game was Braxton playing? What past was tangled up in this? He pocketed the cold metal star, a new knot of dread tightening in his gut. He turned his back on the gruesome offering in the watching darkness, moving swiftly towards the shack's feeble promise of shelter. He raised his hand to signal Martha to open the door. A rifle shot cracked the night air. The sound was terrifyingly close, echoing like thunder off the basin walls. Splinters exploded from a log beside Silas's head. He threw himself flat, rolling behind a low outcrop as a second shot kicked up dirt where he'd been standing a heartbeat before. The muzzle flash had come from the pines directly across the basin. Close. Too close. They'd flanked him, waited for him to show himself. Inside the shack, Martha screamed. The door rattled violently against its makeshift barricade. Not from the outside. From the inside. A heavy thud, then another. Esther's voice rose in a shriek of pure terror, abruptly cut off. Silas scrambled, trying to get an angle, his heart a frantic drum against the cold ground. They weren't just outside. Someone was already in the shack with them. The barricade hadn't kept them out. It had kept him out. He'd walked right into the trap, leaving them alone. The blood, the badge, the shots, it was all distraction. The real threat had gotten inside while he was drawn out by Braxton's macabre message. He heard a man's rough laugh from within the shack, followed by Martha's choked sob. The door shuttered again under a heavy impact. Silas raised the Winchester, finger tightening on the trigger, staring at the fragile barrier between him and the horror unfolding inside. He couldn't shoot blindly. He couldn't get to them. He was pinned down outside, helpless, while the nightmare he'd tried to prevent had already breached the walls. Esther's terrified silence was the loudest sound in the world. The rough laugh from inside the shack curdled Silas Thorne's blood. Martha's choked sob ripped through the night, sharper than the rifle shots still echoing off the basin walls. Esther's silence was a void screaming terror, pinned behind the meager outcrop, dirt stinging his eyes from the near miss. Silas fought the icy paralysis of helplessness. They're inside. How? The barricade rattled again, not from assault, but from struggle within. He'd been played, drawn out by the bloody carcass, the coyote calls, the sniper fire, all orchestrated to leave the sisters unprotected. He couldn't shoot, not blind, not through the flimsy logs. He needed an angle. His gaze snapped to the shack's broken window, a jagged black hole beside the door. 10 yards of open, moon-washed ground separated him from it. Suicide. The sniper in the pines was waiting. He heard a muffled thud from inside, a man's voice, low and threatening, words indistinct but the malice clear. Martha cried out, "No, leave her alone." Adrenaline burned through the cold dread. Move or they die. He gripped the Winchester, took one ragged breath, and launched himself from behind the rock in a low, scrambling sprint towards the window. He expected the searing impact of a bullet any second, expected the world to go dark. He focused solely on the jagged maw of the window. A shot cracked, dirt sprayed, near his boots. Another. Splinters flew from the shack wall just ahead. He dove the last few feet, landing hard on his side in the gravel and scrub beneath the windowsill, scrambling backwards until his spine pressed against the cold, rough logs. Gunpowder bit his tongue. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was exposed, but momentarily shielded from the sniper by the shack's bulk. The shot stopped. The sniper was repositioning. Inside chaos, the fire cast frantic, leaping shadows through the window hole. Silas risked a glance. He saw a burly figure, backlit by flames, grappling with Martha near the fireplace. The man wore a battered slouch hat pulled low. Martha fought like a wildcat, clawing, kicking, trying to shield Esther, who cowered against the wall, arms wrapped protectively around her belly, face a mask of pure, silent terror. The three-legged stool lay splintered near the door. That's how they breached the barricade, smashed it apart from the inside. Had someone been hiding? Waiting? Hold still, you little hellcat, the man grunted, backhanding Martha hard across the face. Her head snapped back. She stumbled, dazed. Silas didn't hesitate. He shoved the Winchester barrel through the broken window, aiming low, away from the sisters. "Get down," he roared. The intruder spun, surprise flashing across his coarse features. He saw the rifle, saw Silas. He dropped Martha and lunged sideways, reaching for the pistol holstered on his hip. Silas fired. The Winchester's report was deafening in the confined space. The bullet slammed into the dirt floor inches from the man's boot, kicking up a spray of dust and sparks. The man flinched violently, momentarily stunned. Martha, recovering, saw her chance. She grabbed the heavy piece of firewood she'd held earlier and swung it with all her strength. It connected with the back of the man's knee with a sickening thud. He bellowed in pain, collapsing forward onto one knee. Before he could recover, Silas was already working the Winchester's lever, the spent casing clinking onto the gravel outside. He aimed again, this time at the man's center mass. "Hands high. Now!" Silas's voice was pure gravel, edged with lethal intent. The man froze, panting, pain and fury warring on his face. He slowly raised his hands, glaring murderously at Martha, who stood panting, the club still raised, blood trickling from her split lip. Esther remained pressed against the wall, trembling violently, her eyes wide and fixed on Silas in the window. "Martha, the pistol," Silas commanded, his eyes never leaving the intruder. "Get it." Martha moved swiftly, her hand shaking only slightly as she pulled the heavy Colt from the man's holster. She stepped back, leveling it at him, her jaw set. "Tie him," Silas said. "Used a rope from my saddlebag outside the door." He gestured with his chin toward the entrance. Martha hesitated, glancing fearfully at the door. The sniper was still out there. Silas understood. "Quickly. They won't shoot while he's our shield." She nodded, a flicker of grim understanding in her eyes. Keeping the pistol trained on the kneeling man, she edged towards the door, shoved aside the remnants of the table barricade, and slipped out into the moonlight. Silas tracked her movement, his rifle ready to cover her, scanning the dark tree line across the basin. Nothing moved. The sniper was biding his time. Martha returned swiftly, a coil of rope in her hand. Working with efficient, if unsteady, movements, she bound the intruder's wrists tightly behind his back, then lashed his ankles together. He cursed, low and venomous, but offered no further resistance beyond a hateful glare. Once secured, Martha sagged against the wall, the pistol heavy in her hand, breathing hard. Esther crawled to her, burying her face in her sister's side, silent sobs shaking her thin frame. Silas pulled himself up, leaning through the window frame, scanning the basin again. The cold night air bit his face. The coppery scent of the deer carcass mingled with the smell of blood from Martha's lip and the damp wool of the saddle blankets. The coyotes had fallen silent, perhaps spooked by the gunfire or already feeding. The silence now was profound, heavy with the aftermath of violence and the threat still lurking unseen. "Who are you?" Silas demanded, turning his attention to the bound man. "Braxton send you?" The man spat on the dirt floor near Silas's boots. "Go to hell, Thorne." "He did," Martha said, her voice raw but steady. She wiped blood from her lip with the back of her hand. "He called him Hack. Said he was good at getting into places folks didn't want him." "Hack?" Silas didn't recognize the name, but the man's skill at infiltration was evident. He'd likely hidden in the shack's rafters or a shadowed corner before they'd even arrived, waiting for Silas to be drawn away. "Why?" Silas pressed Hack. "Why is Braxton so hell-bent? It's more than $50. More than used goods." He couldn't bring himself to repeat Braxton's vile term. Hack just sneered. "Ask the pretty one. Ask her what she's carrying. Ask her who the daddy is supposed to be." Esther flinched as if struck, a small, wounded sound escaping her. Martha pulled her closer, shooting Hack a look of pure venom. "Shut your filthy mouth." Silas remembered Martha's words by the fire. Special stock. Pure lineage. Hack's implication chilled him further. It wasn't just about the child's future labor. It was about its perceived origin. He thought of the tarnished badge in his pocket, cold and heavy. A lawman star. What connection could it possibly have to Esther's unborn child? To Braxton's obsession? He crouched by the low fire, adding a few more brittle sticks, needing the light, needing the fragile warmth against the encroaching dread. The flames cast flickering light on Esther's terrified face. Silas's own grief, a familiar ache, pulsed alongside the immediate danger. He saw Sarah's face again, not in death, but in life, laughing, hopeful, her hand resting on the gentle swell that had promised their future. "Stolen. All of it. My wife," he said, the words softer now, directed more at the sisters than Hack. "Sarah. We were going to call him Jacob. If it was a boy. Had a name picked for a girl too. Eleanor." He hadn't spoken those names aloud since burying them. The sound was strange, painful. Never got the chance. The fever took them both in 3 days. He paused, the silence thick with shared sorrow. He didn't describe the helplessness, the rage, the slow erosion of his soul afterwards. The simple facts were monument enough. A child ain't property, ain't stock. It's a promise. Or it should be. He looked directly at Esther. Nobody owns that promise. Not Braxton. Not nobody. Esther met his gaze. For the first time, the paralyzing terror in her eyes shifted just slightly, revealing a depth of pain and a flicker of something else. A desperate, fragile hope. A tear tracked through the grime on her cheek. Martha squeezed her sister's shoulder, her own eyes glistening in the firelight. Hack snorted derisively. "Sentimental hogwash. That promise is worth a lot of gold to certain folks. Folks Braxton answers to." Silas ignored him, his mind racing. Folks Braxton answers to. The badge. The emphasis on Esther's child. It stank of something far bigger, far uglier than a backwater flesh peddler. He needed answers Hack wouldn't give. He stood, moving back to the window, peering out. The basin seemed empty, but the feeling of being watched was a physical weight. Braxton was out there, patient. He'd sent Hack in, failed, and now he'd try something else. They needed water. The canteen was nearly empty. The horses needed tending. They were trapped. "We need to fortify properly," Silas stated, turning back. "That window's our weak spot. Martha, help me drag that broken bunk frame over here." He pointed to a pile of rotted wood in the corner that might have once been a bed. "We'll brace it across the opening from the inside." They worked quickly, Martha helping Silas maneuver the heavy, splintered timbers into place across the lower half of the window opening. It wouldn't stop a bullet, but it would slow an attacker climbing through. Hack watched them, his expression unreadable in the gloom. As Silas shoved the last timber into position, his boot scuffed against something half buried in the dirt and debris near the wall. Not wood, something smooth and cold. He bent, picking it up, It was a small, glass bottle, empty, the cork missing. Unremarkable, except for the faint, lingering scent clinging to it. A medicinal smell, sharp and cloying, like cheap laudanum or carbolic. But there was something else beneath it, something vaguely familiar, herbal, something he associated with childbirth. Midwives sometimes use certain herbs. Why was it here? Left by the trapper? Or by someone else who'd sheltered a woman in distress? He pocketed the bottle, another piece of a puzzle he couldn't solve. Had someone else been pregnant here? Did it connect to Braxton? To the badge? The questions multiplied, tightening the knot of apprehension in his chest. Dawn was still hours away. The fire burned low. Exhaustion pressed down on them all. Martha sat slumped against the wall beside Esther, both wrapped in the saddle blankets, eyes heavy but watchful. Hackett slumped over, either asleep or feigning it. Silas kept vigil at the window, the Winchester cold in his hands, his senses straining against the deceptive quiet of the Wyoming night. The sniper was still out there. Braxton was still out there. He heard it then, faint at first, almost lost in the sigh of the wind through the pines. A rhythmic sound, not hoofbeats, something else. A steady, metallic clink, 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 like metal on stone. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the narrow cleft where he'd hidden the horses. A cold dread seized him. He motioned for Martha to stay silent, pressing his ear closer to the gap in the timbers over the window. The sound continued. Clink, clink, clink. Deliberate, purposeful. Silas moved silently to the door, easing it open just a crack, peering out towards the rock cleft. The moon silvered the basin. He saw the gray, gelding first, standing unnaturally still. Then the mule. Their heads were down, too low. He slipped out, keeping low, moving swiftly towards the cleft. The clink sound grew louder. As he neared, the smell hit him, not blood this time, but something acrid chemical, like lye or strong alkali. He rounded the rock corner. The sight stopped him cold. The horses stood hobbled, heads hanging listlessly. At their feet, the shallow, rocky depression that usually held a seep of water after rain was filled with a dark, viscous substance. Someone had poured something into their water source. The clink sound came from the empty metal container, a small, discarded kerosene can, rocking slightly in the breeze where it had been tossed aside. Braxton hadn't just found them. He was systematically destroying their resources, poisoning their water. Silas knelt, dipping a finger tentatively into the foul-smelling liquid. It burned slightly, contaminated, undrinkable. He looked back towards the shack, a silhouette against the starry sky. They had one canteen of stale water left. For 3 people, 2 of them pregnant, in the high, dry Wyoming wilderness. Braxton wasn't just coming for them. He was going to starve them out, thirst them out, break them slowly. The message was clear. There's no escape, no sanctuary. As he straightened, a flicker of movement caught his eye near the basin's rim, opposite the pines. Not a silhouette this time, but a brief, reflected glint. Moonlight on glass. Binoculars. Watching him discover the sabotage, Silas felt a fresh wave of impotent rage. He was reacting, always reacting, while Braxton orchestrated their torment from the shadows. He turned to head back to the shack, the foul smell of the poisoned seep clinging to him. He took one step, then another. His boot landed on a patch of loose, gravelly soil near the edge of the cleft. It shifted. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath him with a soft whump of disturbed earth. Silas threw his weight backwards, but it was too late. His left leg plunged downward into darkness up to the thigh. Jagged pain lanced through his calf as it scraped against hidden rock. He hit the ground hard on his side, the Winchester clattering away into the rocks. He was trapped, his leg wedged deep in a hidden animal burrow or erosion cavity he hadn't seen. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through him. He was exposed, vulnerable. He tried to pull his leg free, but the earth held him fast, the pain flaring with every movement. He scrabbled for the Winchester, but it was just out of reach. He looked up towards the shack. Martha's face was a pale oval at the window, etched with horror. She'd seen him fall. From the direction of the pines, a low whistle pierced the night air. 2 sharp notes, a signal, then the distinct, heavy thud of boots hitting the ground. Not one pair, several. Shapes detached themselves from the dark tree line, moving deliberately down the slope towards the basin floor, towards the shack, towards him, trapped and weaponless. Braxton's patience had run out. The slow siege was over. The final assault had begun. Silas could only watch, helpless, as the shadows solidified into armed men advancing through the silvered sagebrush. Martha vanished from the window. Silas Thorne's leg burned, trapped in the jagged grip of the burrow, the Wyoming night pressing cold and heavy around him. The advancing boots thudded closer, deliberate like the tick of a death knell. Moonlight silvered the basin, glinting off the sagebrush and the distant pines where the sniper had fired. Inside the shack, Martha's scream had faded into a choked gasp, Esther's silence a deafening plea. The low whistle from the pines lingered in Silas's ears, a taunt from Braxton's men. His Winchester lay maddeningly out of reach, its barrel a dull gleam among the rocks. He was pinned, exposed, a fool caught in his own haste. Pain seared through his calf as he twisted, gravel biting into his palms. He clawed at the loose earth, trying to free his leg without alerting the shadows closing in. The metallic clink of the discarded kerosene can echoed faintly, a cruel reminder of the poisoned seep. Braxton wasn't just hunting them. He was dismantling their survival, water, shelter, hope. Silas's fingers brushed the tarnished badge in his pocket, its cold weight a nagging mystery. The glass bottle, with its faint herbal scent, pressed against his thigh. Both were pieces of a puzzle he couldn't solve. Not now, not with death stalking closer. The boot stopped, maybe 20 yards off. Low voices murmured, indistinct but purposeful. Silas froze, his breath shallow, the pain in his leg a pulsing fire. He couldn't see them, but he felt their eyes, predatory, waiting for him to break cover. Inside the shack, a heavy thud shook the flimsy door, followed by Hack's rough laugh, now unbound, venomous. "Keep squirming, girl. Ain't no one coming." Silas's gut twisted. Hack had freed himself. The rope Martha had tied must have been too loose, or the man was slipperier than he'd thought. Silas cursed his own stupidity, leaving the sisters with a bound snake who'd only been playing possum. He yanked harder at his leg, ignoring the sharp tear of flesh against rock. The burrow gave slightly, dirt crumbling, but held fast. He needed leverage, needed his rifle, needed to move. A shadow shifted near the shack's door, a silhouette against the faint firelight leaking through the timbers. Not Hack, another man, leaner, with a long-barreled shotgun cradled in his arms. Braxton's men had flanked the shack, one inside, others outside, tightening the noose. Silas's mind raced. The burrow was a trap, maybe not intentional, but perfectly timed. He couldn't fight from here, couldn't protect Martha and Esther, but giving up wasn't in him. Not after Sarah, not after Jacob, Eleanor, the names that still cut like a blade. He dug his fingers deeper into the earth, feeling for something solid. His hand closed around a fist-sized rock, cold and jagged. Not a weapon, but a tool. He smashed it against the burrow's edge, dislodging a chunk of dirt. The pain in his leg spiked, blood soaking his trouser leg, but the hole widened. He pulled, muscles straining, and his leg slid free, leaving a trail of skin and blood. He rolled to his side, biting back a grunt, and scrambled for the Winchester. His fingers closed around the stock, the familiar weight grounding him. The advancing men were closer now, their boots crunching on the gravelly slope. 3, maybe 4, their shapes indistinct in the moon's pale wash. Silas pressed himself against the rock cleft, the poisoned seep's acrid stench stinging his nose. He worked the Winchester's lever, the metallic snick loud in the stillness. He had maybe 10 rounds left, enough to make them think twice, not enough to win a siege. Inside, Martha's voice rose, sharp and defiant. "Get back, you bastard." A crash followed, wood splintering, maybe the firewood club. Esther whimpered, a sound that tore at Silas's chest. He had to get to them. The window was still his best shot, but the shotgun-wielding man stood guard near the door, his silhouette a dark promise of death. Silas needed a diversion. He scanned the cleft. The gray gelding and mule stood listless, heads low, the poisoned water untouchable. But the kerosene can, discarded near the seep, caught his eye. It was empty, but its scent lingered, flammable, potent. He crawled to it, keeping low, and pulled a match from his coat pocket. The tiny stick felt absurdly small against the odds, but it was something. He struck it against the rock, the flame flaring bright. He tossed it into the seep, praying the residue was enough. A whoosh of flame erupted, small but fierce, licking up the chemical-soaked rocks. The sudden light painted the basin in stark oranges and blacks, exposing the advancing men for a split second. They froze, startled, their faces briefly visible, hard, weathered with eyes like wolves. The shotgun man by the shack spun toward the fire, his weapon swinging up. Silas didn't wait. He sprinted, keeping low, toward the shack's window, the Winchester clutched tight. His wounded leg screamed with every step, but he pushed through, diving beneath the timber-braced window just as a shotgun blast roared, pellets shredding the air above him. He pressed against the logs, panting, the fire's glow fading behind him. The shotgun man cursed, reloading. Inside, Hack's voice growled, "Stay still, damn you," followed by another crash. Silas peered through the window's narrow gap. Martha was backed against the fireplace, the Colt pistol in her shaking hands, aimed at Hack, who stood with a knife now, its blade glinting. Esther was curled in the corner, rocking, her eyes vacant with terror. The fire had burned low, casting long, distorted shadows. "Drop it, girl," Hack sneered, stepping closer. "You ain't got the guts." Silas leveled the Winchester through the gap, his voice a low growl. "She don't need to. Drop the knife, Hack." Hack froze, his eyes flicking to the window. He saw the rifle's muzzle, saw Silas's unyielding stare. The knife clattered to the dirt floor. Martha's shoulders sagged, but she kept the Colt steady, her split lip bleeding fresh. Esther's gaze darted to Silas, a flicker of relief breaking through her fear. "Martha, tie him again," Silas ordered, his voice calm but iron hard. "Tighter this time." Martha nodded, grabbing the rope from the floor, her movements quick despite the tremor in her hands. She bound Hack's wrists and ankles, yanking the knots until he grunted in pain. Silas kept the rifle trained, his eyes darting between Hack and the window, expecting another shot from outside. The shotgun man had retreated into the shadows, likely regrouping with the others. The fire in the cleft was dying, its distraction spent. Silas climbed through the window, wincing as his wounded leg scraped the timber. He landed heavily, the smell of blood and smoke thick in the shack. Martha stepped back, the Colt still in her hand, her eyes wide with a mix of defiance and exhaustion. Esther crawled to her, clinging to her sister's skirt. Silas checked Hack's bonds, satisfied, then moved to the door, peering through the crack. The basin was quiet again, too quiet. The men had pulled back, but they weren't gone. Braxton was playing a long game, wearing them down. He turned to the sisters, his voice low. "We're not safe here. They'll come again, harder. We need water, rest, a better position. My homestead's a day's ride, but we can't move tonight. Not with them out there." Martha's gaze hardened, her voice steady despite her bloodied lip. "Why is Braxton doing this?" "It's not just money," Hack said. Esther's baby is spoken for by someone powerful, someone who pays for bloodlines. Her voice cracked on the last word, her hand tightening on Esther's. Silas's jaw clenched. The badge in his pocket felt heavier, The glass bottle's herbal sent a faint echo of something he couldn't place. Bloodlines. Not just slavery, but a twisted commerce in lineage. He thought of Sarah, of the child they'd lost, and the raw ache flared anew. "Who's Braxton working for?" he demanded, glaring at Hack. Hack smirked, his voice oily. "Someone who don't like loose ends. That badge you found belonged to a man who asked too many questions. Got himself buried for it." Silas's blood ran cold. A lawman's badge. A dead lawman. Connected to Esther's child? To Braxton's scheme? The bottle, midwifery herbs, maybe used to force a birth or worse. He didn't have time to unravel it. The sisters needed him now. He knelt beside Esther, his voice softening. "You're not alone in this. Not anymore. I lost everything once. Sarah, my boy, maybe a girl. I couldn't save them, but I'll be damned if I let Braxton take you or your child." His eyes met hers, steady, a vow carved in grief. Esther's tears fell silently, but she nodded, a spark of trust igniting. Martha gripped the Colt tighter. "We fight, then, together." Silas nodded, a flicker of pride cutting through his dread. He moved to the fireplace, adding the last of the dry twigs to keep the light alive. The shack felt smaller, the walls closing in. They needed a plan. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on a rusted trapdoor in the corner, half hidden under the pile of furs Esther had sat on. A root cellar? An escape? He crossed to it, prying it open with the Winchester's barrel. A dank, earthy smell wafted up, the darkness below impenetrable. Could be a way out, he muttered, more to himself and the sisters. Or a trap. Before he could investigate, a low, guttural sound broke the silence outside. Not a whistle, not boots, but a deep, mechanical groan. Like what under strain. Silas froze, his heart lurching. He moved to the window, peering through the gap. The basin was still, but the sound came again, louder from the rocky approach to the shack. The groan became a creak, then a sharp crack, like a tree splitting. He squinted into the moonlight. At the basin's rim, where the approach path narrowed, a massive shape loomed. A wagon, its wheels glinting faintly, positioned to block the only trail out. Braxton's men were rolling it into place, a barricade to trap them in the basin. Shadows moved around it, at least 6 men, their rifles catching the light. They weren't advancing yet. They were sealing the sisters and Silas in, cutting off escape. But it was the figure standing atop the wagon that stopped Silas's breath. A man, broad-shouldered, his silhouette unmistakable even at a distance. Silas Braxton himself. Not hiding, not skulking. He stood bold, a long coat flapping in the wind, one hand holding a lantern that cast a sickly yellow glow. In his other hand, a coiled whip, its tip dragging in the dirt. He raised the lantern, the light flaring, and his eyes locked on the shack, as if he could see Silas through the logs. A voice called out, cold and commanding. "Thorne, you stole what's mine. Send out the girl, the special one, or we burn that shack to ash with you in it." Esther gasped, curling tighter into Martha. Martha's face was pale but resolute, the Colt still in her hand. Silas gripped the Winchester, his wounded leg throbbing, the trapdoor at his feet a desperate gamble. The wagon barricade meant no running. The lantern meant fire. Braxton wasn't playing anymore. He'd come to end it. Silas's eyes flicked to the trapdoor, then to the sisters. They had moments to decide, fight, hide, or surrender. But as Braxton's lantern swung, casting shadows like specters across the basin, Silas saw something else in the flickering light. A small, glinting object hung from Braxton's belt, catching the glow. Not a weapon. A locket, heart-shaped, ornate, out of place on a man like him. It looked familiar, like something Silas had seen in a dream or a memory of Sarah's. His heart stuttered. Was it hers? Stolen? Or something else tied to the badge, the bottle, the child? The creak of the wagon grew louder, the men's voices rising. Braxton cracked the whip, a sharp snap echoing like a gunshot. "Time's up, Thorne," he bellowed. A spark flared in his hand, the lantern poised to be thrown. Fire was coming, and with it the end. The lantern's sickly glow swung in Silas Braxton's hand, a pendulum of promised fire. The whip's crack still echoed in Silas Thorne's ears, sharp as the pain pulsing in his wounded leg. Inside the lined shack, the air was thick with fierce sweat and the faint, herbal scent of the glass bottle in his pocket. Martha gripped the Colt, her bloodied lip set in defiance, while Esther clung to her, eyes wide with terror. The trapdoor at Silas's feet yawned like a grave, its dank darkness a gamble between escape and doom. Outside, Braxton's men surrounded the shack, their wagon barricade sealing the basin's only exit. The locket glinting on Braxton's belt, heart-shaped, ornate, burned in Silas's mind, a ghost of Sarah's memory or something else entirely. "Last chance, Thorne." Braxton's voice boomed across the basin, cold and final. "Send out the girl, or you all burn." The lantern swung higher, its light casting grotesque shadows on the sagebrush. Silas's fingers tightened on the Winchester, his gaze flicking between the trapdoor and the window's timber brace. The badge in his pocket, the bottle, the locket, they were pieces of a puzzle, but no time to solve it. Fire was coming. He had to act. "Martha," he hissed, voice low, "check the trapdoor. See if it's a way out." Martha hesitated, her eyes darting to Esther, then nodded. She handed the Colt to Silas, who kept it trained on Hack, still bound but smirking in the corner. Martha crawled to the trapdoor, prying it wider with trembling hands. The hinges groaned, releasing a puff of earthy, moldy air. She peered into the darkness, her face paling. It's a tunnel. Narrow. Smells like rot. Could lead somewhere or nowhere. Silas's jaw clenched. A tunnel was a risk, collapse, ambush, or a dead end. But staying meant fire. "Can you manage it?" he asked Esther, his voice softer. Esther's gaze met his, her silence breaking with a whisper. I'll try." Her voice was frail, but there was steel beneath it, sparked by Silas's vow to protect her child. "Get ready," Silas said. He moved to the window, peering through the gap. Braxton stood atop the wagon, his whip coiled, the lantern raised like a beacon of death. 6 men flanked him, rifles ready, their faces hard in the yellow light. Silas counted his rounds, 8 left. Enough for a stand, not a victory. He needed to buy time. He turned to Hack. "Who's Braxton answering to? What's the locket mean?" His voice was a blade, cutting through the shack's stifling air. Hack's smirk widened. "You're digging your own grave, Thorne. That locket belonged to a woman who crossed the wrong man. Same man who owned that badge. Same man wants Esther's kid." Silas's blood ran cold. A woman, a lawman, a powerful man. The pieces clicked, but not fully. A shadowy figure behind Braxton, orchestrating this nightmare for Esther's unborn child. The bottle's herbal scent, midwifery, maybe to force a birth, hinted at a calculated plan. He shoved the thought aside. "No time. Martha, get Esther into the tunnel," he ordered. "I'll hold them off." Martha shook her head, fierce. "We fight together." Like you said. Silas saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had swung the firewood club. He nodded, a flicker of respect cutting through his dread. "Then brace the door. Use everything we've got." They worked fast, shoving the broken bunk frame against the door, piling furs and debris to reinforce it. Silas dragged Hack to the fireplace, tying him to the iron grate with the last of the rope. Hack cursed, but Silas ignored him, his focus on the window. The creak of the wagon grew louder, wheels grinding as Braxton's men pushed it closer, narrowing the noose. Silas crouched by the window, Winchester ready. The lantern's glow was nearer now, its light flickering through the sagebrush. He heard Braxton's voice, low and taunting. "Light it up, boys." A spark flared outside, not the lantern, a torch, its flame licking hungrily. Silas's heart sank. They were going to burn the shack, trapdoor or no. He aimed through the gap, targeting the torchbearer, a wiry man with a scarred face. The Winchester cracked, the shot echoing off the basin walls. The man screamed, the torch falling to the dirt, its flames snuffed in the gravel. The other men scattered, cursing, but Braxton's laugh cut through, cold and unshaken. "Nice try, Thorne," he shouted, "but you're out of moves." Silas fired again, a warning shot into the dark, hoping to slow them. 7 rounds left. Martha was helping Esther toward the trapdoor, her arm around her sister's waist. Esther's breathing was labored, her face pale with fear and exertion. Silas's leg throbbed, blood seeping through his trouser leg, but he pushed the pain down. He had to hold the line. The tunnel was their only chance. Silas moved to the trapdoor, helping Martha lower Esther into the darkness. The air was damp, thick with the smell of earth and decay. Esther whimpered, but Martha's voice was steady. "You can do this, S. For your baby." Silas handed Martha the colt. "Go with her. I'll follow." Martha's eyes locked on his, searching. "You're coming, right?" He nodded, the lie heavy in his throat. He'd hold the door as long as he could. "Go." Martha helped Esther down, the tunnel swallowing them. Silas turned back to the window, the Winchester cold in his hands. The wagon was closer now, its bulk a dark wall against the moonlight. Braxton's men were regrouping, their shadows moving like wolves. Another torch flared, then another. The smell of smoke drifted in, acrid and sharp. Silas fired again, aiming for the nearest torch. The shot missed, kicking up dirt. 6 rounds. He heard a thud against the door, then another, heavy, rhythmic like a battering ram. The bunk frame groaned, splintering. Hack laughed, a guttural sound. "You're done, Thorne." Silas ignored him, his mind racing. The locket, the badge, the bottle. They pointed to a man above Braxton, someone who wanted Esther's child for reasons beyond greed. He thought of Sarah's locket, a similar heart shape, left behind when the fever took her. Was it hers? Stolen? Or a cruel coincidence? No time to dwell. The door buckled, splinters flying. Silas fired through the gap, the bullet catching a man's shoulder. He screamed, falling back. 5 rounds. The torches were closer, their heat palpable. Smoke curled through the window, stinging Silas's eyes. He coughed, his wounded leg trembling under him. A voice, not Braxton's, called from outside, older, authoritative. "Thorne, give up the girl, and you walk away." It wasn't a henchman. It was someone else, someone new. The man Hack had hinted at? The one behind it all? Silas's heart pounded. He glanced at the trapdoor. Martha and Esther were gone, hopefully safe. He had to buy them time. He fired again, the shot wild, meant to scatter. 4 rounds. The door gave way with a final crash, the bunk frame collapsing. 3 men burst in, rifles raised, faces twisted with rage. Braxton followed, his whip coiled, the locket glinting on his belt. Silas didn't think. He dove for the trapdoor, rolling into the darkness as bullets tore through the air above him. He landed hard, pain exploding in his leg. The tunnel was narrow, the walls slick with damp earth. He crawled, dragging the Winchester, hearing boots thud above. Smoke followed, thick and choking. He caught up to Martha and Esther, the Colt's barrel glinting in Martha's hand. Esther was gasping, her face slick with sweat. "She's hurting," Martha whispered, panic edging her voice. "The baby, it's coming." Silas's stomach dropped. Now, in a tunnel, with Braxton's men above, he pushed forward, leading them through the dark, the tunnel sloping upward. The air grew fresher, the earth less oppressive. A faint glow ahead, moonlight. The tunnel opened into a shallow cave, hidden by scrub oak, overlooking the basin's far side. Silas peered out. The shack was ablaze, flames licking the logs, Braxton's men silhouetted against the fire. Braxton stood apart, his lantern down, the locket catching the firelight. The older voice called again, closer. "Find them. The child's worth more than all of you." Silas turned to Esther, her face contorted in pain. Martha held her, tears streaking her grime. "We can't run," Martha said. "She needs help." Silas nodded, his mind racing. The cave was defensible, but they were trapped. He had 4 rounds left. He handed Martha the Winchester. "Cover the entrance. I'll help Esther." Martha took the rifle, her hands steady despite her fear. Silas knelt beside Esther, his rough hands gentle as he helped her lie on the saddle blankets. Her breathing was ragged, her eyes pleading. "Don't let them take my baby," she whispered. "I won't," Silas vowed, his voice breaking. He saw Sarah in her face, saw the child he'd lost. He wouldn't fail again. The older man's voice echoed closer, boots crunching on the slope below the cave. Silas found a glass bottle in his pocket, its herbal scent strong. Midwifery herbs. He broke the bottle, soaking a cloth from his coat, hoping it might ease Esther's pain. He pressed it to her forehead, murmuring, "Hold on, girl." A shadow moved at the cave's mouth. Martha fired, the Winchester's roar deafening. A man fell, clutching his chest. 3 rounds left. Braxton's shout followed, furious. "You can't hide forever, Thorne." Silas looked at Esther, her labor intensifying, then at Martha, her face fierce in the moonlight. The locket's mystery, the Badger's dead lawman, they didn't matter now. Only survival did. Only family. The cave shook as a heavy object slammed against the entrance. Another wagon, sealing them in. Smoke from the burning shack drifted closer, choking the air. Esther cried out, her labor peaking. Silas held her hand, his grief and resolve merging into something unbreakable. A new sound cut through the chaos, a distant horn, sharp and urgent. Hooves thundered, not Braxton's men, but others. Riders. A dozen, maybe more, their silhouettes cresting the basin's rim, rifles glinting. A voice, strong and clear, shouted, "Braxton, stand down." Silas froze. Allies? Or another threat? The older man's voice cursed, panicked. Braxton's whip cracked, but the new riders fired, a volley that echoed like thunder. Braxton's men scattered, some falling. The locket gleamed as Braxton turned to flee, but a shot caught him, and he fell, the locket skidding into the dirt. Esther's cry pierced the night as her baby was born, a girl, tiny, wailing. Silas wrapped her in his coat, tears burning his eyes. Martha sobbed, holding her sister. The riders approached, their leader a grizzled man with a sheriff's star, not tarnished but shining. "You're safe now," he said. "We've been hunting Braxton's kind for months." Silas didn't relax. The locket, the badge, the bottle, they hinted at a larger shadow, one the sheriff might not know. But Esther's baby was alive, free. He looked at the sisters, their faces glowing with fragile hope. "We're family now," he said, voice rough but certain. The cave's mouth was clear, the wagon pushed aside. The fire's smoke lingered, but dawn was breaking, painting the Wyoming sky in soft pinks. Silas carried the baby, Martha supporting Esther. They stepped into the light, the sheriff's men guarding them. The locket lay in the dirt, its secrets unanswered, but Silas knew one truth. He'd kept his vow. For Sarah, for Jacob, Eleanor, for this new life. The basin was quiet, the fight over. But as they rode away, Silas felt the weight of the badge in his pocket. Someone was still out there, the man behind Braxton. The fight wasn't done. Not yet.